Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing. Okay, ready?
Welcome
to Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
optimal
wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
So, Chris, I want you to make a guess. How many microbes do you think are in, like, the average human body? Your body.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a lot.
Yeah.
A million. A billion. Let's say a billion.
Still not close.
No, okay, wait, 100 billion.
Our microbiome is made up of an estimated 39 trillion microbes.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jazz. We are the producers of Eat, Move, Think.
That boggles my mind.
39 trillion little bugs in your gut.
Wow.
So if you think about it that way, it should have a big impact on the rest of your wellness.
I think it does. And I think the Medcan registered dietitians field a lot of questions about the microbiome. Like, should I care about it?
Yeah.
How does what I eat impact my gut microbiome? Can I change it? What levers promote the health of my gut microbiome? And then there are gut microbiome tests coming up all the time.
You can do them at home. Is it a gimmick? Is it science-based?
Do they tell you anything? Are they worth the money?
Yeah.
And today we have Leslie Beck, Medcan's Director of Food and Nutrition and our Eat host, talking to a worldwide expert on the gut microbiome.
Yes, we've had him on the show before, actually. His name is Dr. Brett Finlay, and he is a microbiologist and a professor at the Michael Smith Laboratories at the University of British Columbia.
And they're going to be answering the questions that we just explored.
Yeah.
It's a wide-ranging topic about diet and gut microbiome health.
What are some things that you can do today to start to make your gut microbiome healthier, and what does that even mean?
It's a great show.
Let's do it. Here's Leslie Beck in conversation with Brett Finlay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Eat, Move, Think. I'm happy to welcome Dr. Brett Finlay to the podcast. Brett, we've had you on the show before. Welcome back.
Hi, Leslie. Great to be here again.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because gut health, gut microbiome, it is just huge. There's huge interest in it from consumers as well. It is absolutely a trending topic. So let's start off with some of the basics. Tell our listeners what exactly our gut microbiome is.
Yeah, so basically all the microbes that are living in your gut. And so your gut, is mainly in the lower intestine, and it consists of the microbes. So this is mainly bacteria, which most people know, things that cause disease like Salmonella, E. coli, viruses, which we're not very good at studying very much, as well as things like fungi and other eukaryotic cells that live there too. When we say microbiome, we're often pretty much talking about the bacteria only because that's the ones we were able to study better. But really, it does include all the microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, everything living inside your gut. And there's a lot of them. They think that there's at least as many microbes living in and on you as there are human cells. And because each microbe encodes DNA, they think the amount of genes encoded by the microbiome is about 100 times that of humans. So
wow.
I hate to insult you, but you're only 1% human and 99% bacteria at a genetic level. Sorry, Leslie.
And what exactly does our microbiome do? What do these microbes do that live in our large intestine?
Yeah, so we didn't really know very much about them. We knew they were there ever since Anthony van Leeuwenhoek made his first microscope and started looking at these things 300 plus years ago. But after they finished sequencing the human genome, they started sequencing the microbes in our gut. And what I think is remarkable in the last decade, we've learned so many different things they're involved in. Early in life, they're involved how your gut develops, how your immune system develops, even how your brain develops. And then if you take the top 10 diseases of which Canadians might die of, 9 of those 10 actually now have microbial links, things like cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And we never previously even dreamt these microbes involved in that. We just thought they're involved in, there's only one microbial disease in those top 10, and that's pneumonia. It's a viral, actually. So what they do, the sky's the limit right now. It's so trendy. There's a joke in the field of what microbes don't do. They're involved in everything, right?
Fascinating. Yeah, and they also do things like produce vitamins. They activate phytochemicals that we consume from plant foods, and they synthesize hormones like serotonin and regulate, as you mentioned, our immune system. So they're involved in many, many things. Tell me then, what does it mean? We hear this all the time, to have a healthy microbiome.
That's one of the hardest questions there is. We're pretty good at figuring out what a bad microbiome, a disease microbiome looks like, but what is a healthy? See, the thing is, there's a lot of microbes in and on us, but they're very different between people. The microbes of your partner, for example, living with you are more similar than the microbes of your identical twin living somewhere else. So there's a vast number of microbes. There's no one microbe that is found in all people around the world. So you kind of have to think beyond this. If you believe in biology that important things are conserved, why the heck don't we all have the same microbes?
Well, we read that a healthier microbiome is one that has a diverse community of microbes in it, a robust, diverse community. Would you say that that's true?
That's very true. Think of it as, the Amazon rainforest ecosystem. We know diversity is important, and it just makes it a much healthier ecosystem because really it is an ecosystem.
What are some of the health problems that have been associated with having a less diverse microbiome?
Yeah, I mean, there's many diseases that have been associated with altered microbiomes. I mean, things like asthma, for example, early in life. This is a big one we worked on a lot. Cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, obesity, diabetes, strokes. The list is very extensive where the microbes are different in the people that are diseased versus people who don't have that disease. And usually it's because these microbes are more inflammatory. So they trigger the body's inflammatory systems. And this is actually a detrimental effect on the body, which then tends to cause diseases. So example, inflammatory bowel disease, that's inflammation of the gut triggered by microbial pieces. And even things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, if you have more of these inflammatory microbes, it causes more tissue damage, which we think then contributes to the disease.
So you mentioned earlier, we all have a unique microbiome. What are some of the factors that shape our gut microbiome?
Yeah. So, your listeners are probably thinking, well, it's probably host genetics, right? My genes in a code. Ironically, there's very little data to support that. We haven't found human genes that say you're going to have these microbes and not these others. It's really environmental. So it's what you eat, it's who you live with, it's your exposure to pets, dogs, cats type thing. When you're born basically sterile, and you acquire microbes from your mother and the world you live in and from the dog that licks you and siblings, for example. I think of the microbes as kind of a filter between you and the outside world because you acquire all these microbes from the outside world.
Also things like, well, you mentioned diet, but also alcohol use, stress and illness, physical activity, they can also shape your microbiome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything you do.
And sleep.
And sleep. Absolutely. Yep. All those things. Yep. And it's a fairly plastic environment. Like if you go on a diet, your microbes change within 24 to 48 hours, their composition in response to what's coming into their world. So that's, as we get on, we'll talk about how you might, improve health and or prevent disease, because we can change these things pretty quickly, whereas we can't change our own genes very quickly. We can't at all right now, actually.
So let's delve into diet, which I've read is one of the most powerful tools that can alter the composition and the activity of our gut microbiome. What do we know so far? Where are we at with respect to the research around diet? Which foods help to maintain a healthy, diverse microbiome?
Yeah, this is a very complex yet very topical area that many people are working on right now. So when you think of diet, we think that we're taking in nutrients to allow us to have nutrition. Ironically, you're actually thinking about taking nutrients that sponsor the microbes. They can eat those things and they will then give you beneficial effects. White flour, white sugar type, very simple carbohydrates and sugars, that's actually absorbed very high up in the intestine before it ever gets down to the lower bowel and really doesn't need many microbes to do anything there. So ironically, if you're eating those kind of diets, you're actually starving the microbes. So if you want a good microbe healthy diet, that's where all your fibers, your complex carbohydrates, and eat your salads, eat your fruits, eat your nuts.
Whole plant foods.
Absolutely, because we actually don't even encode the enzymes to break down those things. We know the microbes are going to be there. So they're going to digest all those fibers and things, and they're going to then give us the nutrients and pass it on to us. It used to be the saying, eat your salad, it's good for you. Now I say eat your salad, it's good for the microbes that are good for you kind of thing. So they're sort of between us and the food. And things like the Mediterranean diet and the Mind diet, which are full of these healthier type plant compounds and things, plant-based diets, these really do promote beneficial microbes. They increase their diversity. They decrease the inflammatory microbes there. And there's many studies showing that these are extremely good things for you to do. And it's really acting through the microbes they do it on.
Right. And so dietary patterns like the Mediterranean diet or the Mind diet. They're very plant forward, whole grains, beans and lentils, lots of fruits and vegetables, etc., that provide fermentable fiber to our gut, which fuels the growth of these microbes, right?
Yep. Just to give you one very profound example that we hit in our own research. So we've talked about the Mind diet. So this is a diet that's very much like the Mediterranean diet, but also designed for cardiovascular diseases. We showed that if you follow the Mind diet, you basically decrease the onset of Parkinson's disease by over 17 years in women, by men by about a decade, just by changing your diet. And similarly, that has been shown that the same holds true for Alzheimer's disease. If you follow the Mind diet, you have 50% chance less of getting Alzheimer's disease, which is a brain disease, right? So we don't know exactly how and everything, but we know that these diets are changing the microbes that are then much more beneficial to us. And so, I think if we take any take home away from this whole podcast, it's, eat healthy diets because it does wonders for your microbes, which then do wonders for you.
So what happens if our gut microbes don't get the carbohydrates or the fiber they need?
They decrease in diversity. You get more inflammatory bugs. You often see this in people, especially obese people. They have more these inflammatory bugs that seem to trigger the inflammation associated with disease problems. So they get very unhealthy, basically. There's less of them, and they're the wrong kind of microbes there. And so this seems to reflect in health outcomes and disease later down the line. So for a whole bunch of reasons, you want to keep your diet well, because if you don't, you're opening yourself to many different kinds of diseases.
And the other thing these plant foods contain are phytochemicals that don't get absorbed in the small intestine, make their way to our colon, which our microbes can use, activate, and make them more available for absorption in our body.
Yeah, our human body, along with the microbes, kind of work together. And often the microbes will break something down into something, and then our human body will break it down to something else, and actually other microbes might chew on something. So you're sort of in partnership with your microbes, and they often take turns breaking down and altering things. Maybe we should also define what a fermentable fiber is. So that's really a complex, often plant molecules. Like think of a celery stick. It's mainly water and all this plant fiber type things. The reason it's called fermentable is in the gut there's no oxygen, and so when you make reactions with oxygen, that's called fermentation. So that just means it's being broken down in the gut where there's no air and broken into pieces that our bodies can then actually use for fuel and energy sources.
So let's talk about fermented foods. There was a great study out of Stanford University that was published in 2021 that showed that eating lots of fermented foods each day, and it was a small study, short duration, but these foods, whether it was yogurt, kimchi, kombucha, that really did increase the diversity of the gut microbiome of all participants and reduced inflammatory markers in the bloodstream. So what's your take on fermented foods for gut health?
They're not going to hurt. Think of what you're doing. You are taking basically microbes and the fermentation products already in action, and then you're putting them into your bioreactor in your gut. So you're delivering a whole bunch of microbes that are already good at fermenting to your gut. So there's a big dose of microbes going in, yogurts and things like this. Kimchi, they have lots of fermenting microbes already in them. So they're already ramped up to ferment stuff. So they just go from one fermenter into your gut, which is another fermenter, and away they go. And then the beneficial products they're all making from this too. So it doesn't surprise me. Humans have been eating fermented foods for a long time. That's how our microbes have evolved. And we fed them fermented foods. And I don't see anything wrong with it, and strongly encourage it.
And many fermented foods, as you mentioned, they contain these probiotic microbes. How do you feel about probiotic supplements? I certainly know that certain strains of probiotics have been used to improve certain disease outcomes. But what about for healthy people? If they just want to take a broad-based probiotic, is that a good thing to do?
Personally, I don't think so. Think of it like this. If you need a new pair of running shoes, you go into a sports store and you're faced with this huge wall of runners of every kind: tennis shoes, basketball shoes, court shoes, running shoes, hiker shoes. You don't just grab the cheapest pair and walk out of there. So when you walk into a probiotic store, you're faced with a similar kind of dilemma. And there's all these different probiotics. First of all, probiotics are not going to hurt you. So if you like taking them, fine. But showing they actually benefit your health is a very hard thing to do in a clinical trial setting. And these probiotics are regulated differently than standard drugs. So the level of proof the burden of proof is less than standard drugs, for example. You're right, though. There are some probiotics that have been shown to work very well for specific diseases. There's yeast that works against C. diff. There's some that work in infants for various things and antibiotic-associated diarrhea, but they're very specific probiotic. If your listeners are interested in probiotics, there's a fabulous site called probioticchart.ca, and it lists all the probiotics available in Canada, what they are, and what's the scientific evidence they work for whatever. Now, what you won't see in there is beneficial health, because, as I say, that's a very hard thing to prove clinically. So if you want to improve your microbes, I would say, improve your diet, for example, and exercise and get sleep. Those will have much more beneficial effect than taking a probiotic that comes in drops or yogurt or anything. On the other hand, I think there's some amazing probiotic sort of mixtures are going to come down the pipes in the future, but they're not here yet.
And I think what many people forget too is you can take a probiotic and that will influence the composition of your gut microbiome. But the second you stop taking it, your microbiome will go back to what it was before.
Yeah. You think about where these probiotics come from. They're usually bacillus and lactobacilli and things, and lactobacilli are vaginal isolates. So they're not designed to actually stick in your gut. And so that's why you have to take 1 billion, 10 billion of these things a day, because they just flush through. Where I think we're going in the future is we're going to be taking bugs from the gut. They're going to be for the gut, and they're going to be mixtures of bugs. You're going to be putting in a whole community, a whole ecosystem, 10, 12 microbes, for example. They will be able to set up in the gut and to have a defined biochemical action that we know is going to be of a health benefit or prevent disease type things.
And so when you're talking about putting gut bugs into your gut, these are the second generation probiotics that you write about in your books?
Yeah, I call it probiotic 2.0 or second gen. Yeah, absolutely. There are companies that are they've gone through phase 2 trials where they're putting, 10, 12 microbes that have been isolated from the gut. They go in the gut and they work well against C. difficile, for example. They're working well against inflammatory bowel disease in these clinical trials. So they all be designed, to actually do something that we need a drug to do. And they're actually going through the FDA as drugs. So they have to go through those very strict clinical trials and everything. What you won't find is a mixture of 10 or 12 bugs that could make you a super fast runner or something really healthy. They're not being designed for that. They're designed for the medical profession to actually fix diseases.
Okay, fascinating. I also want to talk a little bit about, gut cleanses, gut reset diets. If you look on the internet, they're all over the internet. Many of them claim they can restore the balance in our gut microbiome, that following a special 3-day or 14-day diet, for example, can dramatically improve gut health. What do you think about these gut cleanses, gut reset diets?
When you look critically at the scientific literature, there is none. There's no studies that have done correctly to prove this is of any beneficial value. And frankly, my personal opinion is it's actually will do more damage than good. For example, when you take antibiotics, you kill some of your microbes. Your microbes kind of go back, but they don't actually go back all the way. And if you take about 3/4 of antibiotics, you get further and further away from where your microbes were before, and it puts you in a bad position. I had to have a colonoscopy because that's a rite of passage at my age. And so I did the experiment. I tested my microbes before and after. And what happened is, anyone's had a colonoscopy, that you swear there can't even be a microbe left in your gut. You're just cleansed out, right? I know it's gross. But then within a day, boom, they bounce back. And came back exactly the way they were. Repeated cleansing of things, you run the risk that the wrong bug comes in first and resets the colonization wrong, and it can't actually go in the right direction, goes in the wrong direction. And like I say, there's no scientific evidence that I've ever seen to say that this is beneficial. And so I really question why you'd want to do this.
That's a good point. And so you're referring to, cleanses like colonics and things like
exactly.
that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And certainly with these diets that are out there, I'm quite certain that a 3-day diet, as healthy as it might be, is not going to permanently change your microbiome or provide long-term health benefits.
No.
So what do you think about these direct-to-consumer tests that can analyze your gut microbiome? People do these tests at home. They send off their stool sample for analysis, and then they get results back to tell you, which bugs are in your gut. And some even provide diet recommendations or specific supplement recommendations based on the composition of your gut microbiome. So what are these tests measuring, and how are they different?
Yeah. So what you do is you send off a piece of feces, and they will then sequence the microbes that are in there, and they'll run it through their computers, and you will then get a long list of all the microbes If you're a geek and you love microbial names, it's really exciting. You get these 5,000 names you could put up on your wall, which don't mean anything to anyone, but you get a list. They can figure out what genes these microbes encode, and so they can predict what foods, for example, these microbes can break down. The problem is that our microbial system is so complex and so different in each people, it's very difficult to consistently prove this is what you need to do. You can have some clues what kind of health your general microbes are in. You can say they're generally, highly inflammatory, and you've obviously been eating a lot of junk food and things, and this is probably not so good for you. But to actually base a health claim on it, it gets very difficult right now. But other tests, they're coming. I mean, inflammatory bowel disease, you can predict a lot. Autism, you can see there's changes in microbes that maybe we could hopefully push them in the right direction in the future. But we're just not there yet scientifically. And so it's a fantastic concept, a personalized diet. Okay, let's say you've got all these microbes. You should eat this, and this based on your microbes. Great. I'd love that to be true, but we're not there yet. The other problem is that they're a one-time snapshot of a little tiny piece of feces. Now, to do it right, you should probably ideally test your whole intestine every day for a week, or some gross thing to think about, right? Because it's just a tiny snapshot.
Right.
And we've already said, changing your diet. I mean, if I go for a run, I'm sure my microbes change right then and there if I did it before or after a run, for example. So population of microbes are living in us that never come out the other end. There's also some living in the small intestine. They never come out. We don't see them coming out in the feces, for example. So it's really not a really collective measure of all the microbes that are in your gut. It's the ones in that tiny little piece of feces you sent off for testing.
At that one point in time.
At one point in time, exactly. Yeah.
So we know, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all diet that has consistent effects in everyone for either weight loss or metabolic health benefits. And as you say, our microbiome explains part of this.
We all at Christmas eat a bit too much and gain a pound or two. And then New Year's, we decide to go on a diet and let's try and lose it. And if you look back over the last 40 years, every year you creep up a little notch. And this is just what we do as your weight increases. There's some really neat studies that they call this yo-yo dieting. The experiments done in mice, but I think they're translatable to humans, is if you go on a diet, you shift your microbes. And the microbes think you're starving. So you select for microbes that can really produce good energy based on a small amount of food intake, like our ancestors when they were calorie starved. So then you go off it, boom, goes your weight, right? Because, oh, hooray, look at all these calories I can chew on. And your then weight goes up again. And then if you said, oh, I've gained some more weight, I better go back on a diet, those starvation bugs are still there and they won't let you lose weight because they're producing more energy. So the moral of all that stories was really, if you want to diet, stay with it and don't go on and off diets, because that is the worst way to really lose weight.
That's a tough one for our society.
Totally.
So we certainly have learned, as you mentioned earlier, that, people respond differently to food, their blood glucose response, their triglycerides, based on their microbiome, their genes, many other factors, whether it's physical activity, sleep, etc. So the National Institutes of Health says that precision nutrition or personalized nutrition based on an individual's unique factors, including their microbiome, they predict that this will become mainstay in medical care by 2030. Do you think that microbiome testing will be ready for prime time by 2030?
Yeah, I think it will. Yeah, we're learning that much about them. We're rapidly figuring all this out. Yeah, I think that the microbiome test will be just like every other test you do, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, Ironically, it's more important to understand the differences in our microbes than it is in our genes. I mean, you and I are virtually genetically identical. Well, other than the sex chromosome, we're 99.99% identical. Yet our microbes are completely different. So what gives individuals their uniqueness is actually their differences in their microbes. And also, I always make lots of enemies when I talk in personalized medicine meetings and things, because I get up and the first thing I said is, you guys are all working on the human genome. You're working on the wrong genome. And I proceed to convince them that, 99% of our genome is actually microbial. And that's where all the effects are. And the tiny little bit in the humans, that's nothing compared to the changes in the microbes. But I think incorporating all that as we go on to this whole personalized medicine thing, I think it has a lot of power. And it makes a lot of sense, too, because, we do know there's differences between people. Remember, we only really started studying these things, 10, 12 years ago. I got into about 15 years ago. We called it normal flora then. And we couldn't even sequence them back then.
Right.
There's no flowers in the gut. What's the flora about anyway, right? But, the power of science these days. I think we can make inroads and computers and things. And yeah, I think it'll start to be quite usable by then.
Well, there certainly are some very large research projects about to start or underway that are going to be collecting all this data, our unique features from a diverse population of participants that will really inform personalized medicine.
Exactly. I mean, it is a very big data collect, so it's going to be very complex. That's what we do these days. That's what science is being geared for. And I think these large trials will give us a lot of clues about what we should be looking for.
So right now, based on the research we have, what do you feel are the most promising areas for microbiome testing?
We've talked a bit in the testing about the blood sugars. I think that is well along. We knew long ago that when you took a fecal transfer from a fat mouse into a thin mouse, it gained weight, and a thin mouse into a fat mouse, it lost weight, and heavy people into thin mice, they gained weight. So I think we've all been waiting for this magic anti-obesity microbiome kind of thing, but that actually hasn't matured so much. We can tell who's obese and not based on microbiome. I think what the testing is going to be quite good for is disease predictions. We can tell if you have Parkinson's with 80% accuracy just with a fecal sample. Cardiovascular disease, okay, that's heart attacks and strokes. That's high cholesterol, right? Well, it turns out when you eat red meat, it's the microbes that break that red meat down into a molecule, and the body breaks down another molecule. And ironically, it's these that cause the whole cardiovascular issues. So it's not the cholesterol levels. So actually, it's a better prediction of looking at these microbes than the actual cholesterol levels for cardiovascular disease, which is heart attacks and strokes. And so I think there's huge potential in those areas. Our work in asthma, we can take the feces of a 1-month-old and we can predict whether they're going to asthma by looking at their feces, whether they have the right microbes or not. So we're now working, okay, well, if you're heading in an asthma direction, can we introduce microbes early in life to push you away from that so you don't get asthma later in life type things? So there's all these things coming down, but the clinical trials are behind. They're coming. I think, especially with autism, there's actually been some spectacular, nice data come out in smaller trials on fecal transfers, improving autistic features. It's not going to cure it, but it's doing that way. So I really think this is a major revolution in medicine that's coming. The problem is we want it here now. We don't want to wait tomorrow to do this. And if you can treat cardiovascular disease by changing your microbes, or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, for example, these are huge things in our society.
Right. It's very exciting.
It gives us a whole new way of looking at things that we just never thought about before. Go back to Alzheimer's. I mean, there's real excitement in that area that things like the MIND diet, you can drop your Alzheimer's rate by 50%. That's amazing. And just by changing your diet.
Right. And even, those studies showed that you don't have to follow it perfectly. Even following it moderately well is associated with protection. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, exciting times ahead for sure. And just fascinating. Every week on Eat, Move, Think, we like to provide our listeners with actionable advice that they can use. So if you were to leave our listeners with 3 pieces of advice about keeping their gut microbiome healthy, what would they be?
Can I have 4 just because it fits the story
yes,
nicely?
Can have 4. Okay.
There's a book called The Blue Zones. It's 5 areas of the world where people live forever. And when I was writing this book on healthy aging, I sort of wanted to know, why would these people be living healthy ever? It's Costa Rica, it's Mediterranean area, it's Okinawa, Japan, it's Loma Linda, California. Well, what do these 5 areas in the world, how can people live forever there? There's 4 things that come out. First is diet. They don't eat a lot of red meat. Okinawa eat a lot of fish, Mediterranean diet, you know what that is. Loma Linda, California is kind of weird, but it turns out they're all Seventh-day Adventists there, and so they don't eat meat as part of their religion, so they're not eating a lot of red meat. And Costa Rica, they eat rice and beans and a pig roast at New Year's, but they don't eat a huge amount of meat. So diet is your number one. The second is the communities they live in. So they're multi-generational homes. So you've got the 80-year-old daughter looking after the 100-year-old dad, and you got the grandkids downstairs, and the dogs are roaring through the house. I mean, these people are exposed to young microbes all the time. Community, Loma Linda, California, you can, it's a nice community type thing. Exercise is the other one. Exercise is very beneficial for your microbes, which is very beneficial for you. And you don't have to be a marathon runner, but you have to be active. Walk down to the town center to play cards with your buddies or something like that. And then the 4th one would be stress. All these places have a de-stressed lifestyle. And I think we're all guilty of living the ultra stressful life. Maybe COVID smartened us up a bit, I'm not sure, but all the data shows you'll add about another decade of healthy living to your life if you follow these sort of general principles. You can add 10 years of healthy living, it's a major percentage of your life. So there you go. Sorry, 4 things, but I think all great. 4 wise things. And
absolutely. So diet, community, exercise, and managing your stress. Those are the 4 biggies.
Yep, that'll add a healthy life. Yep. I mean, the main message is try and think your life also by all the buddies you're sharing your body with. I mean, you're this super organism. It's just you and your 100 trillion other microbes walking around with you. You can't see them, but they're there. And these are your friends, and look after them because they'll look after you, kind of thing. It's a bit bizarre way to think about it, but I think it actually, makes it sort of come home. This is how we can actually live and improve our own health and lifestyle, just by incorporating microbes into it.
Yeah, excellent advice. So thank you again for joining me today on Eat, Move, Think, Brett. I always enjoy speaking with you. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing lots more about this fascinating field of microbiome, precision nutrition over the next few years to come.
Thanks a ton, Leslie. Yes, it was fun. Love your microbes. They're good for you.
That was Leslie Beck, Medcan's Director of Food and Nutrition, in conversation with Dr. Brett Finlay, microbiologist and professor at the Michael Smith Laboratories at the University
Follow Dr.
of British
Finlay on
Columbia.
Twitter at Finlay Lab, FINLAYLAB, and follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at Medcan Live Well.
We'll post episode highlights and links that you can visit on our website.
Say hello and send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
Eat, Move, Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. I am Jasmine Ratch, managing producer. Social media and strategy support is from Chantel Gertin, Andrew
I'm
Arnex,
executive
and Emily
producer
Dozer.
Christopher Shulgin, and we'll be back soon with a new episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
This podcast is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with the specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.